Now, on to our final interview of the morning. Experts and civil society have weighed in on the impact of corruption on human rights. As part of a series of webinars on the subject, the Human Rights Commission, in conjunction with the Mail and Guardian, hosted another virtual discussion yesterday. This time, the Commission recommitted themselves to working with government and offering advice in this regard. To tell us more, we're joined by Human Rights Commission Chairperson, Advocate Bongani Majola. Advocate, great to have you. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Tell us a little bit more about these webinars and particularly the ones that you had yesterday.
Well, these webinars actually started as part of the program that we had designed in 2019 to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Commission. But because of COVID-19, we were not able then to have those gatherings, and we started these webinars. So they are continuing. We will continue to have different types of webinars. We've had webinar on a number of issues, and this corruption is one of them. Just to go back a little bit also on corruption, we have been monitoring the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals by the South African government, and we have noted that we need to do more, and part of the problem was also corruption, which then led us in our strategic planning in June, July last year to then prioritize corruption as one of the priority focal areas that we're going to deal with.
Good. I want to get to the main purpose behind these webinars. What are you hoping to achieve?
Well, the South African Human Rights Commission has the power to promote human rights, but also to educate the public. So we intend, first and foremost, to educate the public about their rights, because we realize that there isn't sufficient understanding and awareness of human rights in the country, and the webinars help us in that regard. We also then wanted to do these webinars in order to also celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Commission. So it's promotion, creating awareness and understanding, and also the education of the public.
I want to focus in on human rights, and we have noticed during this particular time, during COVID-19, that there have been some gross violation of human rights. And I bring up one example, and that of the PPE fraud and the corruption. I mean, this certainly does fall under something that is a massive human rights violation and could in some instances be considered murder. I would like to hear from your perspective. What is your take on this?
Well, our take in the Commission is that corruption is a very serious violation of human rights. South Africa actually is part of the promise, of the international promise to leave no one behind. In other words, South Africa has agreed to the Sustainable Development Goals, and 2030 is only 10 years away. And 2030 requires that South Africa, among other countries, should end poverty in all forms everywhere in the country. It should end hunger and ensure food security, among other things. There are many other and corruption has been one of the central inhibitors of achieving those sustainable goals, sustainable development goals. And in the sense that, it takes away the resources that are required to do a lot of things that government is required in terms of Section 7.2 to do.
The reality is that when we think of human rights and we think of it should be to the betterment of South Africans, and we of course have seen so much corruption going on in government, and this impression that is being created that government is trying really hard to address corruption and the issues that are affecting society. What is your take on this? Do you think that they are doing the right thing right now, or is it a little bit, too little, too late?
Well, I wouldn't say it's too little, too late. I think that it's a mixed bag. There are the good things that they are doing, and there are things that they are not doing. For example, corruption thrives when you have society and a government that doesn't have effective and accountable institutions. You see, South Africa has poured money into some of these institutions, the municipalities. Look at the report of the AG this year. You see, and there is no consequences for whatever the municipalities are doing, because the municipalities help us with votes and so on. So the chaos just goes on and on and on and on. South Africa is now known as the most unequal society in this country for a variety of reasons, corruption being one. Well, I should say that the institutions that are required to deal with some of the things that will eradicate corruption are weak, they are not accountable, and so on, and which is fertile ground for corruption.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on the most important issue here. For the longest time, we've seen law enforcement agencies just not acting. We're seeing a different organizations, civil society groups. We're seeing people, just normal people, crying out for justice, and it never seems that justice is ever served. And this is the problem, is that people that are committing these crimes are not being held accountable for it. Because this, of course, creates a very bad impression for society and for South Africans that feel that, well, you know, if they can get away with it, we can get away with it. And it doesn't create a good leadership example.
Yes, you're absolutely right. You see, it encourages self-help. It also reduces the effectiveness of the state, because the state is told, but others did it and you did nothing, why us, and so on. It frustrates the poor and makes the poor even more poor, and then the rich become richer. The rich and mighty use their might in order to acquire more wealth. And the end is that the Sustainable Development Goal to end poverty and to end hunger goes out of the window. The South Africa is required, for example, to also do something with education, with health, with a lot of other things in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. And some of those goals, like the promise not to leave no one behind, requires that we have to have disaggregated data in terms of age, sex, geographical location, etc. And the statistician general does not have sufficient resources in order to collect this disaggregated data, which government then can use in order to see who are the most vulnerable and where should we take our resources. So the budgeting simply just occurs, I don't know, I wouldn't say in the vacuum, but there's no sufficient basis for the budget. To promote what South Africa has committed itself to. In other words, the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
Yes.
Advocate, I just want to ask you one final question as we wrap. Obviously, time has run out now, but we basically are asking the question: what is the impact of state corruption on human rights? And this is the long-term picture. What are the consequences? What will happen to South Africa if corruption does not stop? How will this now obviously be impacted onto society? And how will they react against this leadership that is still carrying on with corruption, even though the warning bells and signs are all there and nothing is changing?
South Africa is likely to become a self-help state. In other words, those that are mightier will be able to impose their might, and those that are poorer will be marginalized even further. There will be no sufficient access to food. There will be rampant poverty continuing. There will be inequality in many different ways. There will be lawlessness because, you know, without accountability, not only in the police, but yes, especially in the police and the justice system, but elsewhere in government departments and so on, when there is no accountability and the government doesn't really do much to ensure that there is proper accountability for anyone and everybody in government. And also, if business does not join forces and ensure that there is also accountability on their part, then we are going to have a very, very, very difficult situation, a very poor state.
Thank you so much for talking to us about this vital issue. South African Human Rights Commission Chairperson, Advocate Bongani Majola. Pleasure hearing your views on this. He's talking to us about this issue in the background of a webinar that has started on the impact of corruption on human rights.